and doing it to solve safety and reduce risk and reduce time to do those inspections. And ultimately, what I would say, increasing inspection cadences for customers to be able to create better operations with a man-piloted interface, basically a drone being flown by a controller in the field to a drone being flown over the internet out of a dock.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Boss and Beyond. This is our new podcast series for utility leaders driving change. I'm Nicole Estevez from Boss Marketing, and today's guest is Seth Hutcherson, the VP of Sales here at Boss Solutions. And the topic we have for today's episode is leading transformations. So, Seth, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, of course. So before we dive into your work today at Boss, I love to go back a bit and look at some of your early moments in your career that shaped your perspective on transformations. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and one role that really stood out to me was about 8 years ago, so 2017, 2018, when you were at Verizon Skyward IO working with drones, robotics, and integrated telecommunications. And I can imagine it must have been very exciting time for you to work there, especially as those technologies were just starting to gain traction. So we wanted to know what were some of the early use cases for these technologies in the energy and the utility sector.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, this is a great question. Early days of the connected strategy of drones to do a number of different use cases was really interesting. And I was working side by side in a lot of the critical infrastructure industries, very similar to today. We were focused on ultimately what would be a connected platform, a drone platform, along with kind of that data capture method. How could that solve business problems? And I think initially it was really a lot of discovery around sending drones into places where people were being sent and doing it to solve safety and reduce risk and reduce time to do those inspections. Much like today, in very similar fashion, a lot of the same use cases around infrastructure inspection, around cell tower inspection, around sending drones into tough conditions to do those inspection and documentation workflows. It was the early days of how drones or robots could truly transform those type of workflows. So it was a very exciting time for sure.
Yeah, and would you say the biggest early value was around safety, efficiency, cost?
I think all three. When you peel it back, it really needs to be focused on business outcomes. When we think about what drives businesses, it's reducing costs, increasing safety, and ultimately, what I would say, increasing inspection cadences for customers to be able to create better operations. So when we think about that, it was very similar things. Reducing sending a truck roll out on a line to do a inspection of a transmission or distribution line, sending a drone up to do a visual inspection of a cell tower instead of sending a climber to reduce risk in their business. But very similar use cases as today.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how safety often becomes like the entry point for innovation in that sense. And
Yeah.
speaking about that evolution, in 2021, you joined Skydio when it was a relatively small company, like around 100 employees, and work on drone programs for critical infrastructure for 4.5 years, working your way up to a VP sales role in the company as it grew rapidly. Can you please like describe to us how Skydio drones have changed the management of critical infrastructures?
Yeah, I mean, this was a really critical point in my career where I saw the early days of the transformation of the technology really started to be adopted at scale. And kind of the early days at Skydio were the learnings of how to grow up and how to support customers and ultimately defining how we're providing value for them. And I think over time, the tool became a nice to have into a need to have. Skydio did a really good job of defining a marketplace where taking drones, building autonomy stacks and software alongside of those drones to do more safe inspections with ultimately less manpower or knowledge of how to operate drones safely. And so when you think about it, the early days of Skydio were really defining the markets we're going to go support, really kind of showing how our technology could help save time and reduce the need to train pilots in ways they had before because the autonomy was built around the hardware. And so I think that grew from the early days of how to adopt this technology into how to adopt it at scale. And so it was a really Really fascinating 4.5 years at Skydio. Incredible product market fit, and to see the growth of Skydio generally.
And what would you say what was the change as the company scaled and the adoption increased in that example?
I mean, much like many companies, Skydio grew up in how to support customers. Where I really saw a pivot point was when we moved from capturing structures with a man piloted interface, basically a drone being flown by a controller in the field, to a drone being flown over the internet out of a dock. And that transformation, I still remember the early days of when the initial dock was announced, to really that initial proof of concept, to starting to scale drone dock adoption. And, I think there was a massive pivot point there, because ultimately the tool became not only the trusted tool, but it became the tool that was used on a daily basis. And so that scaled effect of using that hardware to capturing more data more safely, and doing that more efficiently, again, drove more adoption, drove scale of product, drove even more value proposition for a lot of customers.
I feel it was a cool moment to see that happening, right? And it sounds like the market was very ready at that point. So I just want to know what personal key learnings that you have from that adoption process too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stages you gotta go through. You can't skip over them. There has to be a technical validation stage of, does the product do what you say it's gonna do, right? Does the product do it efficiently? And then I think as you kind of reduce the complexity of the operation, it becomes one by way of, for a customer, how do I adopt this to scale? And ultimately, Skydio had to evolve into, how do I sell and support this at scale? And so kinda learning about how that's done, learning how to customers like to adopt that. And then I think the last thing that I think everybody has to really grasp is not only do I have to adopt it at scale, but then what do I do with the insights, and how do I change my operation? So I think that's what we're starting to navigate today, even as the adoption of this type of hardware takes place. How do I manage the amount of data and turn that into insights, and turn that into actions that change the overall operation of businesses?
Thank you so much for sharing your learnings. And it really shows how the industry has been evolving in that sense. So bringing it to today, you recently joined Boss Solutions as the VP of Sales, as I mentioned. How do you see Power AI helping electric utilities modernize their inspection programs?
Yeah, it's a natural progression. I'm super excited to be here. I'm excited about what we're building, and we're just in the early days. Like, we're just starting to really start to see customer adoption take scale. And so I look at it this way, again, kind of back to my roots. My roots are, on that kind of that culmination of hardware and software to do change management for businesses. I think drones, dock-based drones are kind of the necessary tool now to operate for a lot of critical infrastructure companies, including utilities. And I think the next wave of adoption is, how do I scale the insights, as I just mentioned? So, what I'm really excited about here at Buzz is, how do we help customers adopt products, that AI intelligence products, and adopt that at scale to put it into their operation? Because the need to turn data capture into insights is only going to grow. And we're going to see a massive swing of this amount of data that's ingested to be able to turn into operational insights. And where do I send truck rolls? When do I send people? How do I inspect more efficiently? A lot of these kind of things are starting to evolve in a place where they need products like Buzz to do that more efficiently, to turn the amount of data into insights much faster, and reduce operational cost and drive better efficiency. So super excited to be here. It's a great time, and we're building something special.
Yeah, of course. And I know that one thing that comes a lot in conversations around this topic is like the misconceptions utilities have sometimes with AI. And from your perspective, what's the biggest misconception that the utilities have with AI, and how would you advise them right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts by way of, like, just cutting through the noise. The coin term using AI in their inspection workflows or in their data asset management workflows today has been something that has been around a long time, right? So moving from a time-based maintenance into what we call a condition-based maintenance, these are programs that people have been trying to solve for quite some time. And AI now is the buzzword of choice to do that more efficiently. I was looking at it this way, and coming from Missouri originally, living in Missouri, from the show me state, you got to show them, you got to prove it to them. You got to You got to cut through the noise of like, truly, what am I able to help day one? And so here at Buzz, we are heavily focused on a validation phase, taking customer data, taking insights and turning that quickly into, does it work? Does it help me? Can I realize real value quickly? So that's the first step. The other is, how do I build at scale? So, we're one component amongst a broad set of components, probably, that they're looking to start to use for their asset-based management, workflows. We have a lot of partners that we interact with, and I think it's super important to understand holistically as they're building a program, an asset-based management program, what are the strengths and weaknesses of everybody, and how do you want it to be interacted, and how do you want it to be scaled across your enterprise? And so, thinking about that as you partner with folks, their willingness to adopt kind of what they fit best and interact with the others in the ecosystem, I think is critically important. And then the third is just relationships. The utility industry is born out of a lot of deep relationships. Customers do business with customers they trust, with partners they trust. And, I think it's important as you choose partnerships that they're long-standing, that they're people and brands that you trust. Ultimately, they're here to help solve business problems and not just be a cog in the wheel. And so I think it's important, those three things: adopting at scale, cutting through the noise, invalidating, and then really building long-standing relationships with partners that you trust, are probably the three most critical pieces.
I agree, and I think that's great advice for our listeners. When looking at your career overall, you help companies go through significant transformations across multiple markets. Can you share, before we go, some of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way?
Man, there's a lot. It's tough to boil down. I do think, a couple key insights that I've learned. Again, kind of back to this relational industries, there is a lot of fluff around how customers work with technology partners. You could probably take a poll amongst a lot of utilities, and there's a lot of dead programs that they've born and built and spent a lot of money to adopt, and ultimately just never take shape. And there's a lot of reasons there, but a lot of it comes down to, I think, understanding what is the strategy to build long-standing relationships with customers that you can trust, and do it by way of maturity and product. Utilities they have a wave of change taking place around them. And just to highlight a couple, obviously there's a labor shortage and there's a labor turnover going on in the industry right now, where older generations are moving out and younger generations are taking shape. There's a
Mhm.
technology wave of like, how do I adopt
Yeah.
technology at scale, including AI tools? And then the third is just need for more power. And if you look, there's not a utility across the US today that doesn't probably have some sort of capital planning exercise going on to build more generation, or build more transmission or distribution efforts, because the need for power is only growing exponentially. And so I think the one key learning that I always come back to, in the face of change and transformation, the steady resolve is building partnerships and relationships with people you trust, building on tried and true methodologies of testing and validation, and ultimately building it around a framework of collaboration amongst partners to build the right product. Building a siloed effect of, I'm going to build it in house and I'm not going to trust any of the partners out in the marketplace today, or vice versa, going out into a partner ecosystem that really doesn't have a good integrated strategy, both of which can be failure points. And so you have to kind of be mindful as you build that, to ensure that you're building long-term success with AI partners like us and many others. So
Perfect. I feel like that was a perfect takeaway just to end this podcast. And thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to honestly hear your insights. And thank you for everyone who's listening. Be sure to check out the other episodes in our Boss and Beyond series, where we will continue this conversation like this with leaders driving change across this industry. Thank you. Thank you so much.
thank you.